Now he's back with us. Congressman Bob Latta is joining me on the Scott Sand Show. Congressman, thanks for calling back.
Hey, Scott. Thanks so much.
Always appreciate your time, sir. We were just talking with one of our economic experts about the national debt and both candidates' plans to address it, which really, frankly, they haven't been talking about much. One of the big concerns that we've got is we've got to honestly look at cutting spending somewhere along the way. We're not going to be able to get out of $36 trillion in debt without cutting spending along the way. Have any of your colleagues, are we any closer maybe in the next term, the next session of Congress, to actually, having a budget rather than going from continuing resolution to CR?
Well, you're absolutely correct. You and I have talked about this, and the numbers from the Congressional Budget Office. When you talk about the debt, you have to pay the interest on the debt. They're saying that by the year 2032, this is last year or so, that we were going to pay $1 trillion to pay interest on the debt. It happened this year now. We are now going to pay $1 trillion. It's the number 2 item on when you think of Social Security, now it's interest payment, Medicare, and then defense. So those top 3 are mandatories. And so what we have to do, and you're absolutely right when it comes to our budget, but we have another issue. We've got 12 appropriation bills that need to be passed. We got 5 done, about 74% of the which you might call our on the non-mandatories. So when you look at those numbers, we were on our way to get the other 7 done, but when you have about 5 or 6 members on our side vote against the not the continuing resolution, that's what they didn't want to have, but just the procedural votes that we have to get the bills up for a vote, they voted against it, so we could never bring these bills up. And so when you can go into each appropriation bill of the 12, you can get in there and cut what you don't need. But if not, then you end up with a continuing resolution, and it's kind of a catch-22. They said, well, they weren't going to vote for this, and they said they're not going to go for the continuing resolution. So what's the alternative?
What are you going to vote for? It's a stalemate.
And the problem is you're never going to get 100%. And Ronald Reagan said 2 things I think we should all live by. If you're with me 80% of the time, you're my friend, not my adversary. And number 2, I'd rather get 80% of something than going off the cliff with all flags flying. But if we don't ever pass something, we're not going to be able to move the ball down the field. So it's really important that, again, we get our appropriation bills done, because that way you don't get into the continuing resolutions. And the last thing you want to do is what the Christmas tree at the end of the year that the Senate loves to do is an omnibus where, they throw everything in there. And it's just like, folks, that's really bad, because, again, when you're over $35 trillion in debt, you're paying $1 trillion to pay interest on the debt now. It's just the prediction is, and this is, I think they were completely off, since they were totally off on the year that we're going to hit $1 trillion just for the interest on the debt. They're saying that by 2050, that interest payment will be our largest payment out there.
It's going to be before that. It's got to be. It only makes sense that it's going to be before that.
Well, you're absolutely right, because we're 8 years early on the $1 trillion just on the debt. Right now. So, we've got to do something, but again, it's just like you're never, nothing is ever going to be perfect, but we've got to move some pieces of legislation to get there. And again, I've always advocated for a balanced budget amendment that would force, if you think
absolutely
everybody else, it's about 47, 48 states either have in their constitutions or somewhere in their statutes saying you've got to, balance. I remember being a county commissioner and in the state legislature, and if things were going bad, it's like, folks, we had to cut. But the drivers out there is especially on the mandatories, and so it's like Social Security and Medicare; those are huge. We can do a lot of cutting on the discretionary side, but we're just going to keep cutting because we just can't keep it up. Because when you look at the revenue, we bring in quite a bit of revenue. We have a huge spending problem then along with it. And it's just like when everybody sits around their kitchen tables, you talk about wants and needs. It's like, you might want something, but it's going to have to be something you absolutely going to have to need, because where's the money going to come from?
Yeah, it's as I was putting it earlier, it's like being at the kitchen table now and wanting to take that 2-week vacation to Italy, and and your credit card debt is already more than your mortgage, your biggest household expense. Yeah. That's where we are today. Yeah. And we're going to bounce to another CR, I believe, now that you're back in session. I think you've got a half a dozen spending bills to pass, I think, before the end of November. I forget the exact deadline dates, but I'm going to assume that, like in times past, this is just going to be kicked down the road another 90 days because many of your colleagues will be in a lame duck session at that point.
Well, and the question is going to be, if President Trump wins, it's going to be a discussion with him. Does he want a short term, or does he want to get something a little bit farther so, his administration can come up with what their budget would look like? And we'd go from there because, what we're looking at right now is December the 20th. That we've got that's when this current CR runs out. And so, nobody wants to wait till December the 20th.
Yeah. Why do you guys always do it during Christmas? Can't you figure out how to change the day? Why are you always working on Christmas Eve and voting just to get home in time for the holiday?
Well, it's one of those things that, they picked the December the 20th date to make sure for military pay. Because, again, this is one of the big issues I'm concerned with. When you have our men and women in uniform in harm's way around the world, and all of a sudden, we go, let's say you go into a government shutdown. And it's just like they're not getting paid. And we have to figure their families aren't getting any money. And, the stories of having our men and women in uniform having to go, their families going to food banks because there's no money, and how are they going to pay the rent, how are they going to pay the electricity? That's why this stuff's got to get done. And again, there's nothing perfect that's ever going to, and nobody's ever going to make perfection. But we got to get there because, again, these appropriation bills are where you can get in. And Tom Cole, who is the appropriations chair, he had all 12 out that we could have been, voting on. But unfortunately, it was stopped by just a very small handful because, our majority is just by razor thin right now. And so, if we have a few of our members vote with the Democrats because they didn't like something, all of a sudden it's like, great, now we have nothing.
Yeah, you've got some Congress members who are just in there to grab some headlines. Is what's actually happening, I'm afraid.
Well, and it's so important we get it done because the question always is this: okay, what's your solution? What is it? What's you?
No solution. No solutions. No solutions. We just want to say no and pound our fist on the table. No solutions given. Congressman Bob Latta here on the Scott Sand Show. Congressman, I know you've been traveling the district this past month. What are the people? What are the manufacturers, the business owners, the farmers in Wood County and in your district telling you that they're most concerned about right now?
Well, for farmers, we don't have a farm bill. And in fact, just by chance this morning, I spoke with G.T. Thompson, who is the chair of the House Ag Committee. We've got to get a farm bill done. Now, I always bite my lip a little bit when I say farm bill because it's only about 20% on the ag side.
Yeah, it's so much more than just a farm bill.
And 80% on the food nutrition side. Because if we don't get something done, because what happens is you revert to law that goes back to the Truman administration, and that's a disaster for our farmers out there. And so, when we did our last farm bill, and again, I represent the largest ag income producing district in the state, and I represent, if my numbers are correct still, the largest manufacturing district. And for our farmers out there, they want to get a farm bill done because it's the safety net / insurance is what they're more interested in, not direct payments, but we got to get something done there. And when you look on the manufacturing side, I go through so many businesses, and yesterday I spent all day in Lorain County. And, the issues I always want to ask people is, number one, it's finding people to work. It's very, very difficult. One of the businesses I was at yesterday, they'll have hopefully get 12 applicants in. They get those 12, 6 show up for work, and by the end of the week, maybe one's left.
Yeah, well, and usually sometimes it's you get 12 applicants and 3 of them show up for the interview, and you're lucky if you get one of them to show up for work.
Right. Yep. And where I was is not a place. It's not low paying job, but so just finding people to work, that's always the number one. Number two is, it comes down to supply chain, making sure that they've got what they have to have. And then after that, you're really talking about the energy front, because, again, serving on the Energy and Commerce Committee, we've got to have affordable energy, just not energy, because if it's not affordable, they can't compete and make a product. So for them, they've got to make sure that energy is there. And so, we have to make sure on the natural gas side that, we went from being told we had none to being the largest natural gas producer in the world now. And we've got to make sure we continue that. And at the same time, it's on the oil production side that when you think that 83% of everything that comes in the state of Ohio is trucked, and you think of all the different chemicals that our farmers use in our clothing that both oil and natural gas provide, that we've got to have those essential items out there to make sure that are on the base load side, and that's what turns everything on this morning. When we talk about our alternatives, those are intermittent. So that means that when the sun goes down, you might not have power there, or if the wind's not blowing. So they're all part of the mix, but we also have that base load, of which I've also done a lot of work lately on, is on the nuclear side, and to make sure that that's in the mix.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, we've seen just in the last 2 weeks what happens if your country is not energy independent. The entire nation of Cuba was without power for several days. They may still be in the dark. I haven't seen an update on that story, but they're without power. The entire country lost power.
Well, and when I read in the Wall Street Journal earlier this morning, they're still without power in a large section of the country. And then you look in our country, after you have two devastating hurricanes, and it's horrible when you think that people might be without power for, days or into the week parts or weeks.
I've been without power for weeks. It's miserable. The time after a hurricane when you're without power for weeks is just absolutely miserable.
Yep. But when you look at the mutual aid we had, the municipal trucks from Bowling Green went down to the hurricane struck areas to help them get power back on, because that's what they all do. They all work together from around the country to get things restored. So, it's important that we have our power, and and another thing I've been working on is making sure the grid is where it needs to be, because when you think of the data centers coming on, and this is just nothing in fables now, they're coming online and they're using on top of what we already need for our energy, 4.5% to 6% more, maybe 8% by the end of next year. And the question is, where's the power going to come from? And the last thing you want to ever hear is that we have blackouts or rolling blackouts and brownouts across the country. And so that's, as one of the senior members on the Energy and Commerce Committee on the Republican side, my duty is to make sure we have power out there.
It's not even considering the national security threat to our power grid, which we could spend hours talking about as well.
Oh, absolutely. I could talk, for days.
Congressman Bob Latta here on the Scott Sand Show. Congressman, we got to wrap things up here, but we'll end it on a question for you. Since I mentioned national security, I still have not found the Jeopardy theme song from our old building to bring it into our new Hinsville studios. But I noticed today, October 22nd, a very important date that's quite a landmark in American foreign policy and American military. Can you tell me what happened, what began on October 22nd? And I can give you a hint if you need it.
Wait a minute. Okay, give me the first hint. Is this like on that one show where you get to call a friend?
You can call. You can phone a friend. Let's take you back to 1962.
Oh, wait a minute. This is the Cuban Missile Crisis, was it?
That's right. This was the day that President Kennedy revealed the buildup of Russian missiles on the island nation of Cuba, and the military, the naval blockade around Cuba was to begin.
Yep. Right. Yep.
Missile
crisis.
Very landmark date. Congressman, always great to have you on. I appreciate your time, sir.
Hey, Scott, thanks very much, and have a wonderful day.